Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to catch up with amazing humans to talk about mental health. Today, I'm really happy to be joined with the amazing person, Steve Carr. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome, and thank you, Matt. Thank you for asking me to come on and have a chat with you about mental health onto your podcast. Thank you.
Amazing. So as I always do, I'll do a very quick introduction to who Steve is, and then I'll ask you to do the proper introduction, if that's okay. So Steve and I know each other, as by many people that actually I know nowadays in the mental health world, through social media more, through the community of LinkedIn. I follow the work that Steve does. He's got an amazing story. I do want to sort of put out the thought at the beginning to say, when we go into some of the conversations today, there might be some things that are a little bit hard or difficult for people who might be listening. So please do make sure you take care of yourself first and foremost. And if anything becomes uncomfortable or you are worried or concerned, there's always people that you can talk to. I'll do a wrap at the end so that you know Samaritan's number and different people that if you do struggle with any of the content today, please know it's okay. So Steve, I'll let you do your introduction if that's okay. Welcome.
Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. So my name is Steve, and I'm a mental health first aid instructor, workplace wellbeing trainer, and suicide first aid tutor for SFA. I've been holding workshops now and delivering and facilitating for roughly about 5 years. And this came about through working in the NHS and going back 5 years, sadly experiencing a breakdown whilst I was at work.
Right. Okay. And we're going to delve really into these subjects because they are important reasons why you do what you do. And we do share a very similar passion for this in experience and understanding and also the roles that we play, because we're both, as you say, mental health first aid instructors, and we come together to chat about this really important subject. So the big question, your journey with mental health, Steve. I know you've got an amazing story to tell. Take as long as you need and just tell us all about what's been going on and what's happened to you.
Thanks, Matt. Sure, yeah. So going back to 5 years ago, I experienced a breakdown whilst I was at work. But it didn't start there. My journey into mental health didn't really start there. It started many years ago, in fact, 25 years ago, when I was a very young boy. From a very young age, I grew up in a very, very difficult family life, very difficult situation. So I grew up in a council estate in a place called Swindon, which is in between Bristol and Reading. So it's a really small town. And my dad was going out to work. My mum was a stay-at-home housewife. And I had an elder brother and a younger sister, each by a year difference. Used to share a bedroom with my brother. I thought he was odd. I need to put this out there straight away. I thought he was odd because he used to listen to heavy metal music.
Right.
That's not odd. I used to listen to rave music. So this is why I thought that he was odd. So we had this clash in music. So half of the bedroom had rave posters over it, and the other half had heavy metal pictures over it. So it was very odd. There were often times when you could hear the clash of music. I'm sure to anybody stood outside, even my parents were there going, "What on earth is going on?" So it was there was kind of standard stuff as youngsters. There was always this rivalry. Me and my brother, we were always getting in fights. The standard thing as siblings. And I didn't really understand them that much. And I think it was the same the other way around. We didn't really interfere too much in each other's lives. But by the age of 14, things were just getting really unbearable for me at home. So sadly, both my brother, my sister, and I were victims to emotional abuse and physical abuse from both my mother and father. And things just became a little too much for me, and home life was just almost unbearable. So I started associating with people just like me from families where they were either physically or emotionally abused. And we found our solace in speaking to each other about what was going on for us, but also by taking drink and drugs.
Right.
So at a very young age, I was 14 at the time, I started drinking and started using at the time recreational illegal drugs. So, we'd be smoking and taking things that we shouldn't have been taking at a very early age. And this was really to help us cope with what was going on at home, like to mask what was going on at home. And so this continued for years, in fact. But I just remember that I was 15 years of age, and it was Friday the 13th of September, and it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was down at the breakfast table, and my brother came down to join me. Now, this time I was 15, he was 16, so he was out to work with my dad, who was a car mechanic by trade. So just started in the trade of becoming a mechanic. He was on YTS, and I remember he came down to me that morning. He said, "Steve, do you want to come and meet me this evening? Come meet me for a drink at Acres Way, it was a place in Swindon, to meet his new girlfriend and some new friends that he had just met." And I said, "No, what would I want to do that for?" You know, remember, we thought each other were weird. So
Yeah.
I said, no, what would I want to do that for? And he said, okay, well, if you change your mind, I'll be there this evening. And then he went off to work, and I went off to school. So normal day, came home from school, got changed, went straight out. I come back later that evening, and it must have been around about 8 o'clock by the time I got home. So it wasn't too late. But something odd, there was a weird atmosphere when I got home, and my dad was kind of pacing up and down in the living room, which is really weird for my dad, because he's the kind of guy that would come home, have a hot bath, and watch blockbusters. Might be showing my age there a bit, but blockbusters was the thing.
Yeah.
So he would normally watch blockbusters, but this evening something was different. Something was very different about him, and he's pacing up and down. And he's got the radio on and the television, the news channels. So I said, "Dad, what's going on?" He said, "Well, there's been a really big accident in Swindon, and your brother's at that scene." Okay, so it was at that point that my dad said, "Well, I'm going to go down and see if your brother's there." He went there. My brother used to ride a motorbike, and he parked in a specific place, and he told my dad where it would be. And so my dad went to this scene, and came back, and something was different about my dad at this point. He said, "What's happened?" He said, "Well, there's police cars, there's ambulance, there's the air ambulance." He said they've shut the road off, but there's hundreds of people down this road. And we were waiting for my brother to come home. And he should have been home roughly about between 9 and 10 o'clock, and he didn't come home. And my dad went down to this location again, see if he could find him. Nothing there, but we knew something now was wrong. So my dad came back home, and it was about 11 o'clock in the evening. And I just remember this scene that played out. There was a knock at the door, and my dad raced to the door, ran to the door, opened the door, and there were 2 police officers stood at the door. And I just remember them saying to my dad and my mum, "Mr. and Mrs. Carr, I'm afraid we've got some bad news. Your son Paul, he's been killed in a car accident this evening." Now, we didn't know the true extent of what happened until a few days later. And what actually happened was 2 guys had finished work at lunchtime, went down to the pub after work, which is not unusual, but had a few drinks, and they left the pub later on that evening, and it was around about 7, so it wasn't too late. They're both drunk, got into their cars, decided to drive home. Now, both racing down this long stretch of road where my brother and 5 other children, the youngest being 7, the eldest 18, which was his girlfriend, and 2 cars racing along this road. It's a very long stretch of road in Swindon, notorious for people racing. And one car's, they're both level people, and they see a car pulling out of a junction, which is opposite a bench where 5 children sat. The car in front brakes. The car alongside it comes up behind, taps it. It starts to fishtail, swerves, rolls over the road, exactly where the 5 children are, rolls over the bench and killed all 5 children. This was where my brother was sat along with all of his new friends, and sadly, 4 of them died at the scene instantly. And my brother was the only person at that scene to survive another few hours, and he actually died later in hospital of internal bleeding. I remember when I went to see him at the Chapel of Rest, it was when we seen him there, it was like there was nothing wrong with him externally. We couldn't see any bruises. We couldn't see anything physically wrong. So it was weird to see him there. It was almost like he was asleep.
Yeah.
But sadly, yeah, he died of internal bleeding later. At that time, we were actually offered support and additional help for our mental health and how we were as a family to be able to cope. But sadly, my father declined the help that was available. And if we go back to 1991, we think about, could we have spoken about our mental health back then? Quite possibly. But there was always the fear of being locked up, or, you know, we know the things that people say, oh, they're mad, they'll be put in a padded cell, and all these things. So these are the things that really worried my father. So he said no. So he declined the help. And so less than a year later, this split my family. It completely tore the community to pieces. And it impacted on everyone's life. It's like people may find now when they've suddenly lost a loved one, that sudden traumatic loss. For us back then, we didn't know how to deal with it. We didn't know how to cope. We couldn't say goodbye to a loved one. And it impacted all of us in different ways. So my father became aggressive. My mother became aggressive to my father. And we kind of all turned on each other because we never knew how to express or talk about our emotions. So as a young child who never told that it was okay to speak about how we genuinely feel, to say that we're lost, that we're feeling, you know, that under the way, or anything at all. And so, or sad. So sadly, for me, this would come out 25 years later. So what I didn't actually realize at the time is that this was what I'd seen and witnessed would create something called, many people are aware of, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so from my teens up until I was 39, I was going through PTSD unbeknown to me. And so I didn't know what was going on. So what would happen is, for years and years and years, when anybody tried to get close to me, I pushed them away, because they started to know about me and started to want to know about me, but I didn't know how to speak or how to tell people what was going on. So more often than not, I'd just push people away or break down in tears. And then I'd leave jobs when people started to ask questions about me and what happened to my family, and I felt ashamed.
Yeah.
So I couldn't talk about it for years. And I just remember I was asked to leave at 16 years old. I was asked to leave the family home. My dad said, "You're becoming, unruly." I think it was the word that he used, unruly. You know what? Go and find your own way in the world. And at 16, I was told to leave the family home. My parents had just divorced. My world was an absolute shambles. It was a mess. So I just turned to what I knew best: drinking, taking drugs. And this would continue until I was 30 years old. And then I'd go back to my dad. And 2008, I was 30 years old. Do you remember what happened in 2008 to the financial system? Yeah, it took a bit of a hit. And so in 2008, when the credit crunch happened, I capitalized on that downturn, and I bought my very first house in 2008 from a mortgage company called Northern Rock. You may have heard of them. Yeah. Went into liquidation, but I got 100% mortgage. I was a successful business development manager for Unilever.
Yep.
Wonderful partner. Life was amazing. And then I went out one night, and a friend of mine said, "Steve, look, I know you like going out. I know you dabble a little bit of drugs." He said, "Do you fancy a line of coke?" So I thought, well, okay, all right, I'll do it. So one line of cocaine on a Friday night would almost kill me a few years later. Yeah. 9 years later would almost kill me. I had that one line, and you see, I had a bit of a taste for it. In fact, I'd become addicted to cocaine. That one line on the Friday night turned into 1 gram. And the house that I bought for 90,000 within less than 6 months, I completely refurbished it, gutted it, and had it revalued at £110,000. It was at that point that I started to push all of my friends away. The cocaine became a daily thing up until I was up to £100 a day, taking £100 a day habit of cocaine. So I stopped working. I quit my job, took £20,000 equity out of the house and spent every penny of it on cocaine. And it was less than a year of having that house that it got repossessed. And I ended up living on the streets for a short period. So my life as I knew it completely disintegrated. I thought that this was my rock bottom point, but it wasn't. I wasn't quite ready to accept and to tell people that it was a mental health issue, that I was addicted to cocaine, and that I had unresolved childhood trauma, because I didn't really want to accept that. I didn't want to admit it either. So I chose not to. After a short period on the streets, a friend of mine seen me and he said, "What on earth is going on? How the hell did you get here?" And he took me in for a while, got me back on my feet, and it was then that I kept again getting in and out of jobs.
Yeah.
And I went back to work as a business development manager for a very large organization, and this was in 2015. And this was at the point that I couldn't juggle all those plates anymore. I couldn't keep up with the lies, the fabrications, the things that I was telling people, to say that I was okay, to put this mask on that we show people on an everyday basis. It became too much. The lie was too big. And then that was the breakdown at work. It just all came at once, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And so I was signed off work for a month with work-related stress. And after a month, I went back to work, and work said, "Right, we're going to put you on a performance improvement plan," which basically meant they were monitoring my performance. And they said, if you dip below 90%, I'm afraid you have to go. So it's unrealistic, 90%. And they managed me out of the business. Within a month of being back, they managed me out of the business. It was that very same month that I knew I'd hit rock bottom, and I thought the only way to end this eternal pain and suffering is to try and end my life. And it was that same month that I attempted to end my life multiple times, 3 times in that 1 month, before I reached out to my GP and said some of the hardest words I've ever said in my life. "I need help. I'm a cocaine addict. I don't want to live." And my GP listened. My GP listened and said, "We need to get you some help. Let's get you some help." So this is when I began my journey of recovery. Little did I know at that time that it was a journey of recovery. But I reached out for help, and I was heard. I was listened to by a professional, somebody that had the experience and training of being able to listen to the person, non-judgmentally, just to say, "I hear you." Then I had a choice, and that choice was, after being diagnosed with unresolved childhood trauma, addiction, depression, work-related stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and high-functioning anxiety, the choice was this. I could stay at home and watch Jeremy Kyle, which I found extremely difficult at the time, or I could go and do something productive. And help others whilst helping myself recover. And so I packed all my belongings into a rucksack, and I made my way down to the Land's End. And it was here that I started to tell people that I was going to walk the entire length of Britain in recovery with just £100, sleeping in my tent rough every night, telling my story to anybody that would listen. And everybody wanted to listen, because one of the hardest things to do for a male was to be able to talk, and especially openly, as I was about to do. It was, again, the second hardest challenge ever in my life, because I didn't know how it was going to go. I thought I was going to be judged. I thought nobody would listen. But people were amazing. The more that I walked England, the more that I told my story. When I went on to ITV and BBC News to tell my story, hundreds of thousands of people started following me. I created a group on Facebook that had 10,000 people in within 3 months. And this was just helping others, supporting them on their journey of being able to openly talk about mental health. My journey is quite unique. And what I would say is when I say to people about it's really important to talk about mental health, it's also very important that we need to talk to the right people, because with the right people and the right support, you know that recovery is well and truly possible. But for me, my recovery journey didn't really start until I came back from that journey 3 months later. I hadn't been to any type of therapy, but what I did do is use 3 months to recover of what I'd been told. It was another 3 years before I went back into work because I concentrated solely on my recovery. 5 years ago, I was at a point where I could barely speak, couldn't hold a conversation, I couldn't publicly speak, let alone work. It was the last thing on my mind to help anyone else. And so I went through 8 different types of intervention, which were hypnosis, NLP, timeline therapy, counseling, using nature, lots of different events, and understanding mental health. So for me, it was important that I went on an MHFA course, a mental health first aid course, to help me understand what I could do when I was ready to go back into employers to say, guys, maybe you need some mental health first aiders. You need somebody in the workplace that somebody can go to if they were struggling. So if I had that person there at the time when I was struggling, I don't know if I would have went to them, but knowing they were there could have made a hell of a difference for me. So my journey really began when I came back, and that was that 3 years of therapy. And then after going on the courses, I then became qualified to deliver the courses. So I became an instructor. And I'm now in a fortunate position to actually be one of only 100 SFA, suicide first aid tutors in the country, to be able to deliver the course without going back into my past and staying in my past, but using and drawing on my experience to add more value. So that's where I am today.
Amazing. You know what, I knew your story before you told it, and I know there's many people on here that may already know some of that, but it's lovely to hear you put your words to it, and reading it versus listening to it, 2 different things, of course. And you know, you say it so well, and it's such a realization that says, look, you've been through a hell of a lot, you really have, and I'm sure loads of people listening will recognize some of those points too, and leaving things and just sort of trying to, you know, substitute, you know, getting support with trying to support ourselves sometimes is pretty dangerous, right? And you've been right there, and I just find it fascinating, Steve, the way that you've taken your journey, and you know, your passion for the subject now is immense. You know, you really are getting some fantastic feedback and support around that, and you know, that's what we're here for. It gives so much inspiration to others. That's critical with all of this, isn't it? By saying it, what do you think about vulnerability? Because that's a big piece of all of this, right? Got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most powerful things that any person can be is vulnerable, and it's holding that state without going into too much detail of, you know, what happened to me. I needed to be vulnerable to accept help, for people to say, Steve, we'll help you. I needed to be extremely vulnerable and trust that people would. Again, it's knowing who to speak to, being vulnerable to the right people, knowing that they were not going to judge me, and knowing that they were going to support me. And I think once we know who those people are, once we know and we can recognize them and just genuinely be ourselves, life really does get easier if you are helped. So we know it can be extremely difficult to reach out for help, very, very difficult, but to the right people at the right time can be completely life-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Yeah, it really is the case, and it's that first step, isn't it? It's the hardest one. You've said it. You've said it in the stuff that I've read about you. You know, it's that first step is the hardest one. But once you've made that first step, and to encourage anybody that might be listening or watching this, you know, the first step is difficult. Never underestimate that. But once you've taken it, you can move forward, you progress and help towards recovery. You know, I want you to talk, because I don't want to do too much talking on this. But positive things, you've done so many things since that turning point in your life where you were at that rock bottom, or that, you know, where you've determined is rock bottom. Let's talk about those. Give us some insight, Steve. What have you been up to in the last few years that have been, obviously you walked the length of the country, which is quite a feat in itself, right? Especially with £100 in a tent. I'm not sure I could do that, but amazing.
Do you know that journey taught me quite a lot, and it was knowing the difference between need and want.
Okay.
Knowing that if we get our basic needs met, sometimes that's all we need.
Mhm.
You know, our lives are so complicated as they are anyway. But that really taught me about how little we need to be happy. And I thought having that nothing around me, apart from just me and a tent. Okay, don't get me wrong. When it was -4, I wasn't too happy. But you know, waking up
Yeah.
and
Need a bit more heat.
yes, yeah. But you know what was fascinating about that is that I had everything. You know, that I would. The plan was I would speak to a homeless organisation and a mental health charity every day, and I would help them. And by helping them, I helped myself. So I would serve at soup kitchens in the evening to help me and help them. So it was giving back. Before I said, "Do you have any food left over?" That I could have. And so many lovely people said, no, you need to eat as well, because, you know, essentially you're homeless. I said, but I need to give first before everything.
Sure.
It's all about giving. But yes, going on to the positives. So in that 3-year period, some amazing things happened. So yes, I walked the entire length of Britain, then wrote a report on my findings and walked it from my hometown in Swindon to number 10 Downing Street. So I went to see David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister then, handed in this report to David Cameron and said, we'll come back to you and we'll add more money into mental health. Anyway, we all know where that went. But then from after that, I thought, I've got this period now where, you know what, I can concentrate on me and focus on what I wanted to do. So I've done many things for charity. Including running from where I live in Swindon to Buckingham Palace and back, the World Mental Health Day, ran up Snowdonia, back down, got a bit lost, and for raising awareness of PTSD, cycled around most of Europe. I think it was 11 countries in total over a very short period. Cycled from Barcelona to Paris in 7 days for social isolation. And this was all for raising awareness for mental health. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something for me. And that was, I wanted to learn how to fly because I'm petrified of heights. And that was the only reason I did it. And so I went to a flying school near me. And I said, I'd love to learn how to fly. So we had a bit of a trade. And I said, I'll do all your social media and trade for flying lessons.
Okay.
And so over this period, we did the trade. I did a little bit of work for them just on social media. They said, we'll teach you how to fly. And I gained my private pilot's license in this period. And so, I became a pilot as well in this period. But it's amazing, isn't it? You know, when we really put our mind to something, what we can actually do. We don't really think about too much about how it would work, walk in Britain. No, in fact, I had no idea of how to do it. I just thought, as long as I go north, I'll be okay.
You don't want to turn the wrong way, right?
Yeah, no.
You end up in Kent, Dover. Oh, this is a short trip.
The wonderful thing about that was because I had no plan, I had so many amazing experiences.
Yes.
Meeting celebrity, millionaires, people that were homeless like me, doing things for charity just gave me a whole new perspective of life and how people. But I also created my business, Mind on pay-as-you-go mobile phone whilst walking for Britain.
Incredible! What a journey! What a journey!
I think the nice thing about it is that that recovery is well and truly possible. Me and I see that now. We know this as trainers, and we say this to people a lot. Our mental health is on this continuum, and it shifts all of the time. It's fluid. One day you could be diagnosed with a mental health condition, and you could be really struggling with your mental health. That's not to say that you'll be there forever. And sadly, a lot of people do get stuck within their diagnosis or stuck on their medication. I chose the holistic route to cure and to recovery. I didn't take any medication. I was offered sleeping medication, but I chose not to because I didn't want anything else going into my body. It was already intoxicated enough. So I chose probably the hardest route. And I remember giving up the drugs, drink, and everything else in one go. And the very next day, the whole thing stopped. All of it stopped. And this in itself, I shouldn't be here today, and I recognize that. And so for me, it was, the education of what happened. How can I help people with this now? And so what I would say is medication has got its place. And I'm not saying don't take it, because you know what, it helps so many people. But for me, it was an understanding of, do I need it? If I don't, what can I do to keep me well? So it's things like nutrition, getting out, having an exercise, even if it's just to walk around. I know you're heavily into this at the moment as well. Great.
Trying, yeah.
But it's great, isn't it? Because we know that our physical health impacts our mental health. They're intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
And the more that we do to protect our well-being and our mental health, and especially right now, we need to be looking at the little things that keep us well, that bring us joy, and having a treat at the end of every day. So things we need to do to stay there.
Yeah, it's amazing. I hear this so often on this podcast, the stories of where people have been, this journey, and that's what this is about. It's the journey of mental health, and it's never finished, right? It's always happening. It's always around us. We have to work hard. It's not a simple task. It's just we have to work on it and be conscious of it. What I love and what I've found in this is societally, people would often write people off because they've struggled, because they've had those serious issues. Because, if I was to, think about how society would look at somebody that was a drug addict, an alcoholic, a homeless person, societally, lots of people would be like, well, they're rubbish. Just park them, push them away, put them away, get them out of my sight. Look at you, you're amazing. You've done so many incredible things. I'm not sure about running from Swindon to Buckingham Palace would be on my bucket list, but I'm sure there was we stood at the gates sort of shouting for Elizabeth, can we come and have a look?
There's more fall on the floor and say,
yeah, I was going to say that's not a short run either. That's quite a decent run. But and this is the challenge we've got, is let's be honest, let's talk about our experiences and let's share them, because the way that we can help improve the conversation of mental health is by being honest and being open and not feeling that people are going to judge us because of an experience we've been through. And those experiences you went through were not your fault. They were just part of the fabric of your life, the things that have happened. And I think that's such a critical point of all of this. So we're at the end, and I hate this thought, and I always say this because Steve, I love you to bits. You're brilliant. You just, you're so inspiring in your story and your journey. You're so inspiring when you support others through the suicide, training and the mental health first aid training and all the things you're delivering. So I wish you all the very best of luck for your journey, continuing along those paths and helping more people. So that's it from me, but do you have any final words or one thing that you want to share with others to give them the encouragement to keep going?
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Matt. Thank you for the compliments. And I would say this to people, that asking for help is never a weakness. It's a strength most people will never know. And also, it's evident now, you can see that recovery is well and truly possible. So please don't give up just yet. Think about reaching out, thinking about reaching out to the right people. And remember this, your life is very, very important.
Wise words from a wise man. Thank you so much, Steve. And for anybody that is listening, if you are struggling with any of the content that we might have talked about today, if there's anything that's worrying you or concerning you, please know that there is always somebody there that would be willing to talk and to chat. And I know from myself, and I'm sure Steve as well, if anybody wants to reach out and chat to us about anything that we're doing, please do. We're here to talk. That's what it's about. But the Samaritans also exist as an organization that can provide some support, to listen, of course, not to give advice. It's non-judgmental. It's free to call on 116 123, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And please know there is always somebody there. You are not alone. So thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time today. And I look forward to following everything you're doing moving forward. So good luck, mate.
Thanks, man.